Hello. Can you hear me? No? This one? Let me try this one.
Speak louder.
Okay, speak loud. Can you hear me? Hear me? No?
I can hear you.
All right. Hello, guys. My name is Pelle Braendgaard. I'm from Newport. We've been working on identity and Ethereum for about 3 years. We've tried all kinds of things. We've made a ton of mistakes. We've learned from these mistakes. As technology is going on, blockchain, we're all learning a bunch of stuff. We've learned even more stuff. The community is doing a lot of cool stuff. Ident3 is really, really cool. Great talk, by the way. And so I'm going to talk about not what we've been doing in the past, but some new ideas that we're working on for making it easier to work with identity directly in Ethereum applications, like directly in smart contracts, state channels, those kinds of things. All right. So before I get into details, I just want to talk a little bit about what is identity, because very often we have many conflicting terms about what identity is. So is it a passport or an identity card? Is it a Facebook account? I know I'm old-fashioned. I'm not supposed to have a Facebook account nowadays, and yes, I'll delete it at some point. But right now, this is the #1 identity platform in the world, probably. There's also here in Paris, so be very quiet. We won't talk too much about it. There's a very shadowy non-governmental organization called the FATF that comes up with a bunch of secret rules, except you can download them from the website, that governs what all of us do if we're working in any kind of financial services. They're called the FATF, and they're the ones who come up with these things like KYC, anti-money laundering. So for many of us, identity relates to this, whether we like it or not. And I don't like it. There are many problems with this, but I don't want anyone to go to jail for these kinds of things either. So we have to follow the instructions of the shadowy non-governmental organization based somewhere in a secret lair here in Paris. I'm pressing the wrong way here. All right. But reality, identity is about you. So it is all of those other kinds of things, but it's about you. It's about your relationships. It's about your reputation. It's me telling you my name, me telling a bank my name, or me telling Gnosis my name or something. But Gnosis or a bank is not really allowed to just believe what I say, so they need someone else to tell them who I am, according to the rules from that aforementioned secret group here in Paris that I will attempt not to mention anymore. So government branch have to tell a bank my name. This is what we call a verifiable claim by a trusted third party. The way we look at identity is that identity is an edge protocol. This is not a term invented by us. First time I heard it was by Ian Grigg. And identity is essentially our relationship in this massive graph. Some of this graph is public, some of it's on Ethereum, some of it's in your head, like who do you know? What do other people know about you? That stuff you did last night after the bar that, no one, it's all part of your identity. You decide if you want to disclose it or not. So each claim is basically an edge in this graph protocol, where some of it's public and some of it isn't. So, as I mentioned before, we have these regulatory requirements to have identity data. So let's just store it on the chain, right? So that's where a lot of the early stuff that we did, like 3 years ago, we came up with the idea of using a proxy contract to manage an identity, and then store some claims on chain. And there are a lot of people that are still operating these kinds of things. ERC 725, I know there's a new version coming out that Fabian's talking about. I'd like to see what he's doing, but follows this approach as well. But we also have this other little thing, another regulatory requirement. Sometimes these regulatory requirements clash. They don't really clash. It's just we have to start getting a little bit creative about it. I recommend everyone here download this report. It's actually pretty good, and there's a lot of things in there. The conclusion is that blockchains can be GDPR compliant. It really depends on what you do with it. And the excuse that we've used in the blockchain world in the past is that the user owns the keys. The user is who's actually doing something. It doesn't actually work, because if you're the dApp developer, you're telling the user to do something bad, you're considered the controller. According to GDPR, you're the one that can be sued. So you do need to know these things and understand it. So just basically, a U-port identity, the way that we've done it in the past. This is the only real slide about, no, wait a minute, there's one other slide about our old traditional system. It consists of an identifier, which is just basically a DID. A DID is a new standard from the W3C that contains an identifier, and you can look up public keys, signing details about this public key. And as you can probably guess, our DID, DID is basically like a URL for identity. Our DID is basically just an Ethereum address, and it's defined in ERC 1056. But that is not an identity itself, it's just an identifier. An identity consists of a set of keys that can do stuff. The identifier based on the keys, set of data, proof of things that I've done. That can be blockchain transactions, that can be claims that I've signed and done, published, given to people off-chain, and a bunch of other things that people say about me, transactions I receive, whether it's everything from CryptoKitties to SpankChain, all of these things form part of your identity. However you link these things together is up to you. So U-port 1.8 attestations, this is our original version of doing off-chain claims. This was used just recently at ETH Denver. So to sign up, you first of all had to stake some ETH using MetaMask, and you'd get an attestation that you'd used this. And this you could eventually use to buy a ticket, which was also an attestation. An attestation is one of the, I think, probably 30 different words people use to basically say verifiable claims. So this is verifiable credentials, whatever. It's so confusing. Even those of us in the industry, Jordy's laughing at me, yeah, we don't have a common name for it. So this allowed you to do a off-chain interaction, prove who you are, and actually get your ticket finally and show it at the door at ETH Denver and enter. So this is one very cool application for it. This is also used in the city of Zug for issuing residency certificates, and there's tons of different projects that have been built on it. Problem with it is that it uses JWTs, which are very, very easy to use and verify in traditional applications. It's very easy to do it in JavaScript, for example, or any kind of server-side backend. The W3C, which is not the Web3 foundation for all of you young people. This is like the original Web3 who developed the web many years ago. So we're working with them in the verifiable claims working group on a new set of standards, and they use both JSON LD and JWT. We're moving it to this as our primary claims format. But if you actually want to use this from smart contracts, as far as I know, and I'm trying to keep up with all the latest Solidity developments, but there's no JWT verify function or JSON parse function in Solidity. And even if you could do it, which I'm probably sure you could, it's probably not like a really useful use for gas price. So, to the rescue. EIP 712 signed type data. Almost everyone I talk to about this confuses it with NFTs. This is not NFTs, that's EIP 721. This is signed type data, completely different. And this is basically a very, very cool new standard. It's been out for probably, I think, about a year now. There's not that many people using it yet because it's still a bit complex to use. But it allows you to create type data that can be signed by any modern Web3 wallet, and you can have some structure in there, some context. You verify that this particular piece of data that you wrote, that you're signing, can only be used in the context where it's meant. And this is done. There's a long review process on it, and it's really, really good, solid standard now. It's a little bit, yes, I said it's a little bit hard to use, both from a Solidity point of view and from a JavaScript point of view. We're working on libraries. We recently released ETH type data, a JavaScript library that makes it very easy to work with it. It's kind of like an ORM. So if you're any old Ruby and Rails developers here, it's basically like active record just for like the cool stuff on the blockchain, right? So it allows you to create business objects, model them, and go in and use them both off-chain and on-chain. So, Miami Airport, Sunday, I've had this HackMB document working on this since July and never been able to finish it. Finally finished this and pushed it on Sunday. I hope to get a lot of eyes on this because it's still early, it's a draft, still early, and I really want feedback on it from everyone. But this is a way of taking the verifiable claims model from W3C, mapping it into this EIP 712 world, so we can now actually use it in Solidity, in our smart contracts. And so one quick example here. I'm not going to show all the boilerplate around EIP 712. You could have for a KYC use case, again, this use case that none of us want to do, but we kind of need to solve to avoid going to jail, to get bank accounts for our businesses, all of these kinds of things. A typical way that people do it right now is do a lot of stuff off-chain, and then a lot of processes that's handled off-chain, and now you just go in, some central service goes in and whitelists an address. One way you could do it here is that you could first of all start with proving ownership of an address. So any Web3 wallet that can sign EIP 712 can just go in and create an ownership proof. So this ownership proof could be, I'm proving that I am the owner of this address, and that could just be my own address, the same address that's signing it, but it could also be linking it to another identity. And then a separate process, you can go through the typical identity verification step, scan your passport, take a selfie, wonder what happens to my private data, all of that kind of stuff, and eventually get a EIP 712 verifiable claim that you have been verified. Now, one thing to note here, there's actually very little in the way of private information in this particular thing. It's just a statement. And the cool thing about signed type data is that the type itself is a statement. There's a bunch of personal information that you need for regulatory reasons as a business to keep hold of, but there's no need to put this on the chain. And this is how you can actually start using these things in a GDPR compliant manner, even for putting stuff on the blockchain. And as an example down here, and I think I have a link further on where you can actually see the full examples here. And none of these examples are complete. This is just stuff I quickly rolled out, so hopefully me and others, we can do some much better versions of this in the future. But an example is you can have a public function on a smart contract that takes one of these claims, like this verified identity claim, and verifies the signature of it, and checks various kinds of things. There's one little interesting thing here. There's a LOA field, which is completely optional. LOA is something that's used, it means level of assurance. It's used in the EU ADAS signature scheme. And there are 3 levels of assurance. It basically shows how much have you checked this data. And this is something to make this legally valid in the EU. This is just the first start. It's not the only part that needs to be use to make Ethereum stuff ADAS compliant, but it's first start and to try to look into doing these kinds of things. Now I just basically whitelist the subject of this verifiable claim. I keep pressing the wrong button. All right, so what can you do now? You could, now I have a different address I want to use on the same project. I can now whitelist it myself because my original address is there. So I can actually just go through a process, post a transaction with another ownership proof that goes in and verifies that I am this same person. This address represents this person that's already been whitelisted. Now it's very easy to do these things. The other part that I'm not really showing here is that these proofs are reusable. And I know you just stood up here, Jordi, and said that reusable proofs is a bad idea. I actually think in many cases it's the whole point of verifiable claims, and in many cases it's not. It depends on the context, right? So this helps the onboarding. If you can go through this process once of scanning your passport, taking a selfie, waiting, repeating it because there's a problem with it, all of these kind of things. If you can do that once, and then there's some kind of out-of-band function where whoever it is that verified the identity originally shares the data. It's a lot more stuff to solve than this, but by having these particular verifiable claims, you can make onboarding, repeated onboarding much, much quicker and much easier. Another use case that we get a lot of inquiries about, and sorry, I know this is a cool ETH conference, and we're not supposed to talk about really like businessy things like consortia and stuff like that. And I know this is completely uncool, but consortias, they would really, really like to do stuff on Ethereum. And even a lot of them would like to do stuff on public mainnet. But the big problem right now is that they don't want to share all that much information about themselves. And this is also true in private chains, and it's true on permission chains. And they haven't figured out how to go in and create real applications without essentially merging in their entire Active Directory network onto the blockchain. So they come up with really, really hacky solutions where there is a centralized blockchain signing solution that signs every single transaction per consortium member, which for me doesn't really sound like a super good idea. So one of the use cases we were thinking about is that you could actually issue a delegate signing. So you just have, like in the consortium, you just have a single address listed in a simple registry for each consortium member. And now each consortium member can issue application-specific permissions to employees or to services or whatever it is, whoever it is that needs to interact with it. And it simplifies all of these use cases a lot. And each business doesn't need to know about who is the head of procurement for whatever it is that these consortia do. So you can just abstract that away into a verifiable permission claims. Now, this is another interesting use case for this. In the Ethereum Magicians meeting yesterday, we were actually thinking that this is also a really interesting way of giving dApps specific signing ability for certain things on behalf of a user. You can use all of these things also to build meta transactions, because if you think about it, all of these public functions that have a sign type data claim and a VRNS, it's basically a meta transaction as well. So you can use these to build up standards-based meta transactions with standard UI for it, standard meta transaction funding service, where you don't need a proxy. So this is a big win. This is just a discussion that came up yesterday. So a lot more work has to be done and thought about this. So how about presenting claims? So we use the term presenting claims when I'm sharing. It's like I am, sharing my ID to the police officer who stopped me from going a little bit too fast, and I apologize very much, but here's my claim that I am the driver here. That's why the identirati space, they like to call this presenting a claims. So if we present a claim in a transaction, we can send all of these, but we really, really need to be careful about not sharing personal identifying information. There's a lot of really good information. Again, I'll just repeat again, go in, find this PDF about blockchain and the GDPR. For example, a lot of people think, okay, all I have to do is just encrypt it or have a hash of it. Not that quick. There are things that you can hash and you can encrypt, but it's not everything. So just think very closely about it before you start going in and putting people's hashes of people's sexual preferences on chain. Very interesting use case that I'm not an expert in state channels, but I'm interested in working with anyone who is working with state channels to use this technology in state channels, because what we can actually do now is we can start bringing in the structured type data, whether it's application specific or whether it's verifiable claims. We can start bringing it into the state channels. So for example, hubs in state channels, which are kind of the interaction, like the people who go in and manage general state channels between a bunch of different parties. They could be required to have some kind of identity information in there. But they don't actually need to store anything on the chain. They could actually help initiate a state channel session using a identity claim. There are many other kinds of use cases, because identity claims doesn't always have to be about, helping out the shadowy government organizations based in Paris. It could also be building up a private social network or something using a bunch of different social claims that you can put into your state channel. So I think there's a lot of potential here, and I'm really excited to see what happens in the next year on this. And final point there, the identity claims themselves can live entirely on the state channel, so you can actually have PII in there. You can have private information there, as long as whoever manages it safely. So the status of this, I submitted the PR from Miami Airport Sunday. I need lots of feedback on it. We're working on preliminary JavaScript support and Solidity support. I'd like to have a library making it easier, both to work with the IP 712, because it's still a little bit of pain. And I'd like to have something like that submitted into Zeppelin, and also specifically for specific kinds of claims. The RFC doesn't specifically talk about domains, contexts, such as identity verification. There are a couple of examples in there, but we need to go in and think way closer about it and help and start building up a bunch of different kinds of domains, contexts, schemas that can be used there. And they can all be deployed, I believe, to something like Zeppelin, so it's easy to use by everyone. Also need some better working samples, and we will add support for this in Uport mobile app and encourage other wallets to do the same. If there's some way we can, if we can figure out how to do zero knowledge proofs and stuff with this in the future, I'm saying, yeah, let's do it, right? Questions? I'll try repeating. So if
I'm not sure I understood where the claims lives, and can I use them to verify on layer 1?
No, so the claims, first of all, the claims live where they live on your phone, for example. So it lives locally. They live off-chain wherever you want to do it. So they can be stored on a server for a business, those kinds of things, and they can be reused. Yeah.
but so they can be used on layer 1. I can use my claims into verified condition from my verifiable claims that live on my phone and validate them on layer 1, and it doesn't use zero knowledge.
No, it doesn't use zero knowledge. But you actually get a lot of benefits because when it comes to zero knowledge versus this, it's basically you need a trusted setup or you need a trusted third party. And so you need someone you trust to issue a verification and then to not put any PII in there. So essentially this is just something that can be validated, and you need to know as a consumer of this that you trust this issuer to issue you these kinds of claims.
Hey, I noticed that there's quite a bit of working around government regulations and laws and so on. Is there anything you'd do differently if you didn't have to comply with these regulations? Any sort of improvements or optimizations that don't have to loop so much?
So the government regulations is just one particular use case for this. But I think, for example, GDPR, I know everyone bitches about GDPR, but maybe a lot of implementation of it's bad, but I'd say it's the right thing to do regardless whether governments tell you to do it or not. And on the KYC front, I think the FATF and most of the regulators and most of the banks who are actually causing most of the more extreme regulatory use cases is a pain in the ass. I don't think it's doing anything particularly good. But we have to follow it. But if it wasn't for that, I think there's tons of really, really cool things we can do with this. Because identity it's basically this graph. And if you publish something straight to the blockchain, then you're publicizing it. But if you can selectively share connections between different accounts, for example, without doing it on-chain, there's a lot of really useful information you can do in a much more privacy-preserving way with this, and you can have lots more data. For example, the state channel, tons of interesting applications for state channels where you can go in and build complex data models that can be reused even across state channels that have nothing to do with regulatory aspects. My hope actually is that we can come up with something way better eventually than having, a bunch of rules written in 2013 that we all have to abide by. But to do that, we need a lot more data, and we need to do a lot more experimentation and make it easy to do so first.
It's more a comment than a question, but you say that all good wallets provide signature for EIP 712. We may not agree on what a good wallet is, but Ledger and Trezor don't support it. So it's more like if anyone here from Ledger or Trezor, or if you know someone from there that could implement EIP 712, sure this guy will be happy, and I will be as well, because we'd like to use this signature scheme more. And I'm sorry, but I disagree. Not all good wallets support it.
That's true. It's not all wallets support it. A lot of modern wallets support it, and I hope more will soon. But I think part of it is having real reasons, real use cases that start giving demand for wallets to do it. Because like MetaMask does, I think there are a couple of others that support it as well. We do at Uport, obviously, and personal sign, which is what everyone ends up using, is the signature scheme of the devil, and everyone uses it because that's what's there. But hopefully in the next year, support will get all over the place. I would really like Ledger to support it. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much.